I have a Dutchmen 802 model of tent trailer. I'm going to replace the cable for the lift mechanism. I'm following the YouTube video replacement of Goshen lift cable in my pop-up camper, and I'm applying it to a Dutchmen tent trailer, which has this same system that I see in the manual for the Dutchmen tent trailer. The difficulty that I've got is that with this particular tent trailer, that the access to the crank is through a little hatch in the front left of the trailer instead of being on the A-frame of the trailer. So I'm going to have a lot of difficulty because there are a whole lot more pulleys underneath the tent trailer that handle the cable and then lead it up through a narrow space. You can see the underside of the crank. Up in here, there are 3 bolts that hold the bottom of the crank, which is located in the little hatch. In the foreground, you can see one of the lift tie rods that I'm going to have to remove following the YouTube video. But the crank itself is hidden away in this tiny space, which is too difficult to get tools into, and most importantly, I cannot take out in order to pull the cable through and attach it onto the drum. Instead, what I'm going to have to do is, with all of my work on the crank, I'm going to have to go in through the tunnel. So I'm starting with the tent trailer in the down position, but with the door open. And I have to do this because I'm going to have to go back inside the tent trailer eventually in order to work on it. And to do that, I've got to go in through a tunnel here, which is really close work. I spent yesterday working in this extremely tight space trying to splice the cable. And in order to do that, I've got to get in to this tiny little space in here to get to the crank. My first hint that something was wrong was when I started seeing some grease inside this cabinet. There's the crank. Yesterday, what I tried to do was to put a new cable onto the winder after taking it out of the trailer. My problem is that I got to work with this cable down in here, and this is the old cable, and as you can see, it's frayed and broken. And I've got to yesterday I tried to splice to attach it to a new cable attached to the wind-up drum, and that just kept breaking. That didn't work, so I'm going to have to go the full route and change the whole cable. But the problem is that I've got to feed the cable up around a whole bunch of pulleys and then up through and then join it. How I'm going to do that in the end, I don't know, but the bottom line is I'm going to leave lots of cable to work with. Take another close look at the underside, the left corner of my tent trailer. I have the usual post here that I'm going to have to remove in order to get at the springs. There are 3 bolts that are going to come out. I think they're all about 7/16. I'll turn those out with a ratchet. Then the line comes through the floor here and goes into a pulley. I'm going to take some still pictures of this with a flash so I can see what's going on, but the bottom line is that the cable comes through the floor, through that pulley, and then goes through another pulley that is over here in the corner, and then goes through the usual Goshen system that we've seen in the YouTube video, front and back of the trailer. So I'm going to follow the YouTube video after I pull the cable out, and I'm going to start by taking some photos to see where the cable routes through the pulleys That one looks pretty straightforward, the other one's more complicated. In order to access the winch, I had to remove this panel in the cabinet by taking out the two screws that you can see. I'm taking some pictures and some video of the back where the tubes go into the Goshen tube so I can remember where everything is and the positioning of everything. Oh, this is me in my tunnel, working away, stuck down in the little hole. YouTube video instructions, I've come across something strange. I took the first two bolts out, pulled the spring tube down, and there's some kind of hard piece of steel in here and here that's on either side. Maybe I pulled out too much, but it seems to be welded to the spring support. I didn't see that in the YouTube video, but I can see the spring on the inside. So now I'll do the other side and then I'll start the center. Over on the left side, I've taken the bolts out, and they are 7/16. And after taking those bolts out, that metal piece is not dropping down, so that must be a mistake on the opposite side, so I'm going to have to be careful to push that back up, ultimately. So right now, the left side is looking like in the YouTube video. I've taken the bolts out now out of the flange. They were 3/8 rather than 7/16. And the bottom of the flange looks like this after taking those. And they're not bolts, there's no nut on them. They're just like lag screws. Okay, I've pulled out the lift spring for the rear right, but as you can see, I've got a problem. The square lift tube and the metal bracket below it also came out. The rear left one came out the way that it's supposed to. And now I'm going to put my gloves on and pull this whole thing down and out from inside the tube, so those springs are out completely. Okay, the whole mass is pulled out now. One strange thing is, although I can now see the end, the original crank end of the cable, and I can see the stop end of the cable, I don't see any crimp along the way. I see the little plate that the crimp sits up against, but I don't see the crimp. Maybe it's buried somewhere in all that mass of grease. So I think I'm going to have to try and figure out a way to clean up a good chunk of that grease, and so I can see what's in there and actually pull the cable out. The end of the tube now looks kind of like that. I've now taken one of the bolts out of the tie plate so I can separate the two parts, the two tubes, as per the YouTube video.
These are the tools me and my cousin used to build things. My grandpa used a caliper to measure the old cable, the diameter of the old cable. Hey, don't let our tool. The cable is 360.
By the way, these are the two tools that I bought from Princess Auto. One for cutting 3/16 cable and one swager. It's the big one. The Home Depot one wouldn't work, so I had to go to Princess Auto and buy a bigger one. They each cost about $40 or $50. And the cable that I'm using came in this box. So I've laid the two cables out. I've crimped the end as tight as I possibly can and laid it beside the other one, laid the cables out just like in the YouTube video, and I have marked with a marking pen the area where the new crimp is going to go. And the cable that I've got, I bought 50 feet of cable, which is way too much, so I probably should cut it, but I want to leave lots of spare, far more than in the YouTube video, because with the Dutchmen I've got to put cable onto the winch, and it's going to be a challenge getting that on, so I'm going to leave myself loads and loads and loads of cable. So right now I need to cut the old cable to remove the little pusher that goes in between these two crimps, and then I'll put the other crimp on. But I have to remember to put slide the end, this end that you can see on the old cable, onto the new cable in exactly that position before I go any further and do a crimp. So I cut the old cable, took the slider off, and it's there, and I then slid from the other end the crimp sleeve down, so hopefully it's in exactly the same position and the same dimension, and crimped it 3 times, using the swagging tool, and then I've got an endless amount of wire that just for safety when I'm dealing with a very difficult winch. Okay, I've now put the pusher plate onto the middle crimp, and it's facing towards, that middle pusher plate is facing towards the free end of the cable. And the other end is, with the loop at the end of it, which I hope is not too big, is on as well. So both pusher plates are on. End of the cable with the crimp and the end pusher plate are lying on the floor still. I still have not assembled the tie plate between the two springs, but my cable now runs up and around and through, up from the bottom and across the top of the pulley, and then my cable I've fed through. It just required a whole lot of pushing. There was a first time when it didn't seem to go through, and I just pushed and pulled, pushed and pulled, pushed, pulled, and it went through. That's probably going between the springs. And then a second time when I hit the end, which was much further over, and it kept pushing and pulling, and eventually it went through, so I did not have to remove the front tie plate or the front springs, thank goodness. So the one cable, the cable that I guess is the one with the crimp in the middle, that goes right through, that operates the front springs, the front lift mechanism, is in. The pusher plate fit very nicely into the upper slot, and now I'm going to go back to the YouTube video and figure out what I'm supposed to do next. And I have now pushed the very, very end of the cable with its stopper and pusher plate all the way as far as it will go, and my cable there isn't a lot of play here, which seems good. So I think things are in about the right position, as close as I can tell. So the next step will be to put the springs in, following the instructions. I've started pushing the springs back into the lower tube with the cable above the two springs. I found that it was really, really easy to make the mistake of turning the two springs upside down, and there's an up and a down for the combination of the two springs determined by the tie bar at the end of the springs. This is the end of the springs that slides into the tube. There's an up and a down to it. One part has a slot for the cable, one part does not. So now I've been able to get the tubes in the springs in part way with the cable sitting nicely over top. The lower cable sitting nicely over top. And I still have to reattach the two spring assemblies together with the, I think it was a 3/8 screw that I took out a whole lot earlier, which was the very last screw that I took out. And because there's so much grease, I'm picking up all kinds of grit on the springs. So I've been wiping them down. There's lots of grit on the floor of my garage left over from Canadian winter. Hopefully not too much salt. So I keep cleaning them down, and there is just grease, so much grease. I am covered in grease. The clothes I am wearing will have to be thrown in the garbage, I'm sure. And the gloves that I wore will have to be thrown in the garbage. And it's very, very greasy and very messy, and I'm covered in grease. Put the bolts, the lag screws, back into the flange, the two of them in the back flange. They didn't line quite up. They were off by about 1 centimeter, or maybe 1/2 centimeter. So I had to wiggle them a lot, maybe undo one of the side springs again, play with them a bit, play with the side spring tubes, and ultimately I had to use a hammer to get them to go in that last 1/2 centimeter or so before I could get the lag screws in. Threading the center front pulley was easy, but the pulley where the cable goes through the floor was very problematic. I had a great deal of difficulty feeding it through the floor. Ultimately, I had my wife try and feed cable down from the top. That didn't work, but at least I could see her finger, and I was able to try and route the cable somewhere. It came through, and I just left it where it was, but I don't think I ever got it through the second part of the pulley. And then I practiced using scrap cable to attach the scrap cable to the winch until I understood exactly how to do it. And then next I attached the actual cable working at the doorway to the trailer so that I had room to work and so that I could try and get a really good join. Then I gradually wound the cable up and into the cabinet. The winch was then bolted into place using the 3 bolts dropped down through the floor, and then the winch was tightened gradually until I was able to actually raise the roof. Wow, we actually got to go camping the next day, and then to celebrate with my favorite beer. On my return home from holidays, I raised the roof to unload the tent trailer and then took images through both the front hatch to take a close look at the cable with the roof in the up position to see if there was any excessive wear on the cable. And I also climbed in through the cabinet and took pictures down in the slot above
the winch. There didn't appear to be any excessive wear on the cable, but of course the cable is not in the correct position on the pulley and is sliding through the wood and the floor, so far smoothly.